Second, two shocking facts around knife crime emerged from this case. The Prevent Learning Review found that Rudakabana admitted to having carried a knife more than 10 times, yet the action against him was far too weak.
Yvette Cooper has just exposed the shocking details of the Southport murder case that the Labour Party had buried earlier.
But how was he allowed to do this? Caught with a knife 10 times? Reported to Prevent 3 times. He called Childline and apparently said that he wanted to kill someone. They called the police went round, they didn't do anything.
The Southport murder case has ignited a firestorm, and Yvette Cooper's revelations have thrown Labour's credibility into a huge British public outrage.
How can she sit there and say that one of these cases I don't want to prejudice, when people have actually died, and the other one, well, it doesn't matter the law now. It doesn't make sense to me, Patrick.
Yvette Cooper's bombshell revelation about Southport has left Labour scrambling to save face.
The CPS has described him as a young man with a sickening and sustained interest in death and violence, who has shown no sign of remorse. On Thursday before sentencing, the prosecution will set out what happened that day and the nature of those offences. But, Mr. Speaker, now that the conviction has been secured, the families, the people of Southport and the entire country need answers about how this horrendous attack could ever have happened.
Yvette Cooper's latest speech raises questions about the transparency of the justice system. From prevent failures to blatant cover-ups, the truth behind the Southport tragedy is finally coming to light.
Multiple different agencies were in contact with Rudakabana and knew about his history of violence. He was referred 3 times to Prevent between December 2019 and April 2021, when aged 13 and 14. Between October 2019 and May 2022, Lancashire Police responded to 5 calls from his home address about his behaviour. He was referred repeatedly to the multi-agency safeguarding hub. He had contact with Children's Social Care, the Early Help Service.
The nation's trust in Labour is crumbling faster than the promises they keep breaking. The nation will never forget the horrific killing of 3 innocent young girls, Bibi, Elsie and Alice, in Southport by a teenager, Axel Rudakuban, who had a sickening and sustained interest in death and violence. This 18-year-old was born in Cardiff after his parents came to the UK from Rwanda, but later moved to Banks in Lancashire. Nobody could ever imagine the poor fate of him becoming a ruthless murderer later.
Yet between them, they completely failed to identify the terrible danger that he posed. How did he fall through so many gaps? It is just unbearable to think that something more could and should have been done. So there are grave questions about how this network of agencies failed to identify and act on the risks. There were so many signs of how dangerous he had become, yet the action against him was far too weak.
Despite being reported 3 separate times under the government's Prevent scheme, each instance was inexplicably ignored or brushed aside. This failure to act raises alarming questions about how such clear red flags could be missed or deliberately downplayed. The British public is growing tired of the hypocrisy and endless scandals surrounding the disunited Labour Party under Starmerism, as they bear the brunt of the government's high tax, low growth and no reform economic policies. Add to that inheritance tax hikes and budget mismanagement leading to significant investment losses, and you have a nation fed up with leaders who seem more focused on clowning themselves rather than solving problems.
But companies should take responsibility before them. The prosecution will provide more detail on Thursday about material Rudakabana searched for online, but I can tell the House the government is this week contacting technology companies to ask them to remove dangerous material that he accessed. Companies should not be profiting from hosting content that puts children's lives at risk.
Earlier, Cooper's Labour Party clarified that this case is not referred through counter-terrorism channels due to the lack of an identifiable ideological motive. It could be due to the actions of the vivacious culprit whose actions were horrifying. They weren't driven by any clear political, religious or ideological cause. So, they didn't meet the criteria set out in the Terrorism Act. Yvette Cooper claimed that she's been keen to reveal terror links in the Southport murder case, but her words sound more like damage control than transparency. After all, if the government had been so eager to share the truth, Why did it take public anger and relentless grilling in the Commons for them to even address the issue?
On each occasion, Rudakabana's case was assessed by counter-terrorism policing, but in each case, there was no onward referral to specialist channel support. The Learning Review has concluded the referrals should not have been closed, and that cases such as these, given his age and complex needs, should be referred to channel.
The only reason they avoid labelling the case as a terror attack is because there was no clear ideological motive behind it. But the reality is that they were suppressing the truth and distorting the story. They were not just sidestepping justice, but were disrespecting the very citizens they claim to serve. These feeble excuses don't just fall flat. They expose fractures in the credibility of Keir Starmer and his cronies.
So we will bring in stronger measures to tackle knife sales online in the Crime and Policing Bill this spring. Mr. Speaker, thirdly, as the Prime Minister has set out this morning, we need to ensure our laws keep up with the changing violent and extremist threats we face. It is for the police and CPS to decide whether individual cases meet the definitions set out in the Terrorism Act 2000 when making charges. But given the growing number of cases where perpetrators are seeking to terrorise, even without a clear ideology.
So the real question is, why did the British people have to wait so long to hear the truth? Even Keir Starmer said that it was about justice and ensuring the killer didn't walk free, but many are left wondering if it's more about saving face for a failing Labour government. They knew every detail from the beginning, but chose to hide it from the public, which created a huge void of rumours, riots and speculations.
Jonathan Hall said this: "The government has to be aware that if there is an information gap, then other voices, particularly on social media, will fill that gap." He went on, "If there is any information you can give, put it in the public domain and be really careful you don't fall into the trap of saying, 'We can say zilch because there are criminal proceedings.' Quite often," he said, "there is a fair amount that can be put into the public domain." Jonathan Hall concluded by saying,
Meanwhile, Chris Philp didn't hold back, calling out the government for its stonewalling and pointing out the obvious. In today's age of social media, trying to bury the truth is a losing game. The government can't keep playing hide and seek with the truth. If there's an information gap, social media is bound to fill it, and let's be real, that rarely ends well for anyone in power. As critics rightly pointed out, if there's any shred of information they can share, it needs to be in the public domain. The public has had enough of vague statements and half-truths. The silence fuels suspicion and cover-up claims spread like wildfire. How long can they dodge accountability before it all blows up in their faces?
So can the Home Secretary tell us about how the intelligence services will be responding to this evolving threat and what the government is doing to prevent this growth of extremism through extreme online content?
Home Secretary.
Well, he's right that what we seem to have is cases where there is extreme violence or obsession grows around extreme violence, and then you have young people who then may cast around to maybe consuming different kinds of terrorist material or extremist material, but at its heart...
Yvette Cooper revealed the shocking history of Axel Rudakabana, a boy that should have been a massive red flag long before tragedy struck. Referred to the PREVENT program not once, not twice, but 3 times, and with multiple run-ins with social services for his violent behaviour, it's baffling how this walking warning sign was allowed to slip through the cracks.
If we've seen this kind of obsession grow, and that's why we need action. Clearly, the focus of the intelligence and security agencies is around those cases where particularly there is organised ideology and radicalisation, as well as state threats. But we have to deal with the kinds of threats that our society faces much more widely, and that means everyone needs to be part of it.
Cooper's comments have also sparked some contention, especially among those who feel that focusing on tighter laws around weapons could divert attention from the deeper social and mental health issues at play.
Good evening. I love Great Britain, but today Great Britain hit rock bottom. The walking, talking advert for the death penalty, Axel Rudakabana, was sentenced for the Southport massacre.
I sentence him to custody for life, with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already.
He showed no remorse, he kicked off in the dock, and he is evil personified.
While Cooper has built a reputation for speaking on public safety, law enforcement and government accountability, Her response to this heinous murder has left the public dissatisfied and furious. Her unawareness and inability to deliver a clear explanation have been nothing short of shameful and inexcusable.
And that had he been able to, he would have killed each and every child, all 26 of them, as well as any adults who got in his way.
But how was he allowed to do this? Caught with a knife 10 times, reported to prevent 3 times, he called child line and apparently said that he wanted to kill someone. They called the police went round, they didn't do anything. The authorities, in my view, have blood on their hands. But as Britain's biggest monster began his 52-year prison sentence today, I looked around at the other news.
The way the Labour Party handled the Taylor Swift-themed attack on July 29th in Southport seems utterly disgraceful and idiotic. Many British people felt they were fooled and lied to.
He was basically stabbing people in a warehouse, at which point we had locked ourselves in an office, and I said it sounded like they were getting killed, so we decided to open the door and go and help them because it sounded like they were in trouble. At which point he turned around and sprinted towards us, and then got halfway in the door before I could shut it, and then was stabbing at me like that.
Last night, when I got home after the show, I saw this.
The British public has also been furious with Prime Minister Keir Starmer, calling him out for his tone-deaf hypocrisy and lack of transparency regarding what he knew about the nature of the attack and why he withheld crucial information. Cooper's attempt to clear the Prime Minister's stance came across as a vague justification. It further highlighted the Labour Party's shambolic position on the matter.
Who has literally screamed the fact that he was going to be a serial killer from the age of about 13. Our politicians should hang their heads in shame for all of the crime that we have, but our authorities should be doing everything to stop it. They should feel awful for everything. I love Great Britain, but they are making it unbearable, and we have to get a grip. So that was my panel this evening. We are joined, of course, by broadcaster Christo Fufas. We also have former Conservative MP Anna Firth and ex-Labour Party advisor Matthew Lazar. Thank you very much for coming on the show this evening, all of you. Christo, I'll start.
Yvette Cooper, rather than addressing the pressing issues under Labour's own leadership, has shifted the blame onto the previous Conservative government by criticising their hostile policy. She claims these policies unfairly targeted vulnerable individuals, including those who lacked proper documentation, despite living in the UK for years. But instead of providing real solutions, this blame game does nothing to ease the frustration of the British public, who are left dealing with the consequences of mismanaged policies. While Cooper talks about a balanced approach, the nation is left questioning whether Labour's priorities lie in solving problems or merely pointing fingers.
As you alluded to in many other parts of the UK, you hear about a stabbing now and you just sort of, oh well, another stabbing. It's just the world we live in now. And it was interesting what you said actually about alluding to the judge's comments about the riots, because I think that those riots are were a build-up of the frustration that people have over not being listened to and not believing that the authorities are keeping them safe. They jumped to the wrong...
It is not surprising that the Labour Party is losing all the support of the British people. The British people are fed up with the constant humiliation of their trust. From stupid responses to shameful and hypocritical justifications for their failures, Labour has shown a delusional disconnect from the realities faced by ordinary citizens. Instead of tackling real issues head-on, they offer excuses and empty promises, leaving the public to bear the brunt of their incompetence.
Wolf attacks are a recent occurrence. No, they're not. Research from the Nottingham-Trent University has identified 44 in recent years, and just like Christoph, I could reel off another 4 where the lone wolf attacker had already been referred to prevent. Now, that's exactly what happened with Sir David Amess. The attacker had been seen by Prevent twice. He'd learnt on the internet what to say in the interview, so...
The shock of the Southport attack sent ripples of fear through the British public, prompting Prime Minister Keir Starmer to announce a public inquiry into the case. He was even accused of cover-up, which came out to be true. Ruda Cubana was a deeply troubling figure whose actions have sparked a lot of debate about violence, mental health, and what might have driven him to commit such horrific acts. He wasn't just someone with a criminal record, but also had a long history of troubling behavior, including an unhealthy obsession with violent media from a young age. Initially, the case was not seen in the spectrum of terrorism and details were being hidden by the Prime Minister just to avoid the prejudice of the case. But does it make any sense to shamelessly hide the crucial truths to delay the full inquiry of the matter?
Charged with murder, attempted murder, possession of deadly poison ricin, an Al-Qaeda training manual, and possession of a kitchen knife with a curved blade. Pleaded guilty on all charges to 3 counts of murder, 8 counts of attempted murder in relation to 8 other children who cannot be named. There's still a reporting restriction on that to protect those children's identities. And also the attempted murder of dance teacher Leanne Lucas and businessman Jonathan Hayes, who tried to, one of those incredibly brave, I mean, both of them incredibly brave, fighting their attacker off. Axel Ruda-Cabana will be sentenced on.
Ruda-Cabana's connection to violence seemed to go beyond just media consumption. He was socially isolated, and this sense of disconnection was clear even before the Southport murders. The Al-Qaeda manual was found at his home just days after the attack, but they didn't charge him with a terror offense for another 3 months. This was the prime example of them being delusional.
Picture of him as a very young lad, not much older than the girls that he killed and attempted to kill. And then we finally started seeing the images of him, court sketches of him with sort of very mad, out of control hair, trying to cover his face with his sweatshirt, which he did in all of his court cases. But this angelic picture of him, many years younger than he actually was at the time of the case. But we now know, well, he wasn't angelic. We know he'd been diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder, but he'd left.
And now the Labour government has vowed to push for changes to terrorism laws, particularly to address the growing threat of lone violent killers and individuals like Ruda-Cabana, who may not fit traditional terrorist profiles but still pose a significant risk. But isn't it too late now when 3 precious lives have already been taken?
Certainly excluded from school for a violent incident involving a hockey stick at some point. He'd shown violent behaviour at school. So again, we just get this impression, this image. First of all, it's just this young, Cardiff choir boy who's been arrested. Everyone stopped saying nasty things. And then we learn far more. And I'm wondering whether we would have learnt more if the case had gone through the full court process.
Ruda-Cabana's story isn't just about one tragic incident. It's about a broader conversation on how the government addresses the root causes of violence in our communities, particularly when they're linked to things like mental health, isolation, and access to dangerous tools.
People have been, sent to jail for claiming it was on the basis that is somehow stirring up racial tensions. We're told even now by Merseyside Police, their last official statement on this, that even though they found deadly poison ricin used by terrorists and the possession of an Al-Qaeda training manual in his home. Well, did they find it last October or did they find it the day they searched his home? We weren't given that information. We were hoping we were going to find that out in the trial. But how on earth can they say there is no terrorism aspect to this crime?
The calls to expand the definition of terrorism could lead to an overextension of these laws, potentially labeling a wide range of violent acts as terrorism. This could dilute the effectiveness of the laws, making it harder to focus on the real threats that come from political, religious, or ideological extremism. It might also misdirect resources that are needed to address the root causes of terrorism. So while the tragedy in Southport demanded action, the Labour government carefully considered whether broadening terrorism laws was the right solution. Yvette Cooper may talk tough about reform and stricter laws, but where was that urgency when it actually mattered? It's a terrifying thought that a system meant to protect us is failing at the most basic level, leaving innocent lives vulnerable, while politicians like Keir Starmer dodge accountability with their usual lies.
And to some extent, I can understand why you would want to try to prevent riots on the streets of the UK, but there's a balance, and there's a balance of getting the right information out to say, yeah, unfortunately this was a terrorist attack, he's in custody and we're doing everything we can to, we'll prosecute him. But people do need the truth,
yes,
as well as, however bad that truth.
Public frustration is boiling over, and honestly, who can blame them? The system that allowed Ruda-Cabana to slip through the cracks is a slap in the face to everyone who trusted it. Despite being flagged in the Prevent program multiple times for violent behaviour, nothing meaningful was done. Now, Cooper's out here promising tougher controls on online knife sales, a move that sounds great on paper but feels like too little, too late.
Fixations with violence and needs that are within our casework, but who have no clear ideology, despite that violent
justice system we have right now is a soft
Although improvements to
I'm sick of this mamby-pamby, oh, poor criminal approach. Criminals who we know have done the crime being given lenient sentences, and in this case, a murderer of defenceless children seen in the act, filmed in the act, and stopped in the act, where there is no reasonable doubt that the death penalty should be on the table. The common arguments are, we are no better than the murderer if we take a life. Well,
a system built around rehabilitation and human rights simply can't handle people like Ruda Cubana, people who are walking, talking warnings ignored until it's far too late.
I just want him off the planet, so people, and in particular children, can be safe. And why should those already incarcerated be tasked with the job of punishing him, which I suspect they will? There's an argument that if you get the wrong person, well, it wouldn't apply in this case, because there is no question of doubt. And, of course, in Ruda Cubana's case, you know he did it. He was caught and stopped in the act. The poor families in the courtroom had to endure watching his act.
It's no surprise that Starmer's tenure is built on a shaky foundation of lies and cover-ups. The public's frustration is palpable, fueled by the constant betrayals they've had to endure. How much longer will people tolerate being misled while their concerns are swept under the rug?
Why should the British taxpayer spend 2.6 million or so to keep a murderous child-killing thug in prison when he's useless to us as a society? Ruda Cubana relished the killings and wished that he'd killed the whole class. He said he was glad that he did it. What kind of a human being is that? I can see no reason why Ruda Cubana should not be executed.
The Southport killer, Axel Ruda Cubana, has been sentenced to a minimum of 52 years for his ferocious and sadistic knife rampage at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. While justice may have prevailed in the courtroom, the lingering question remains: are the British people truly safe, or are they at the mercy of a shambolic system that continuously fails to address deadly threats before they strike? How many more warnings need to be ignored, and how many more lives need to be shattered before real change happens? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more eye-opening insights. Together, we need to push for a system that prioritizes the safety and transparency the British people deserve.